This video contains footage of chickens being harvested for meat. By choosing to view this content, you are acknowledging that you will see knives, entrails, and a detailed look at what goes into this process. If this subject matter is not something you wish to see, please stop the video now. About 2 months ago, we got our first batch of meat chickens for this year out here on the ranch, and today is the day to harvest and process them. That's what we're doing today on Farmer Tyler Ranch. There are two things about this video that makes it a little bit more difficult than the average video. The first thing being that it is going to be kind of hard for me to talk and film at the same time because my hands are almost always wet during this process, or dirty, or nasty in some way, and I don't really want to get all that on my cameras, and I don't want to be washing my hands every 5 seconds either. So I think what I'm going to probably end up doing is just sort of bring the GoPro with me and try to get all the different aspects of what I'm doing and just give you guys a voiceover. I think that will be probably the best way to cover this. The other thing that makes this difficult is there are certain parts, or at least a certain part of this process, that I probably can't show you guys and still be within good graces with YouTube. And that is, of course, the actual killing of the chicken. I'll try to go into as much detail and explain to you guys how I do this as best I can. If you're still having questions, if this is something that maybe you're doing for the first time, there are other videos out there that show actually how to do this. You know, they show it all. This just isn't going to be one of those. As you guys can see, I've got my kill cone hanging on the tree here, and the reason that I put it at this height is because when I do make my incision in the chicken to bleed them out, I like them to be about right here so that I'm working sort of at shoulder level. Below the cone I have this bucket. This is to catch all of the blood. I suppose you could let the blood just drain on the ground, and it kind of seems like I did do that at first. But the reason why I quit doing it is because after a couple days it'll start smelling pretty bad and it attracts a lot of flies. So I started putting the bucket under here and catching it so that I could get it out of here and get rid of it. I want to try to use this first chicken to demonstrate to you guys where I make my incision and how I do it. The proper way to do this is to find his jawline, and you're going to want to make the incision right below his jawbone. Right there is where his jugular vein is, and we want to cut that without touching his windpipe. The reason that we do it this way is because it's been shown that this is the most humane way to harvest them. The way I think of it is that there have been many times where I cut myself and I didn't even know I was bleeding until I looked down and saw blood. But I'm pretty sure that if anything were to happen to my windpipe, I would be very aware of that. So, idea being that if they bleed, you know, and you cut them with a sharp knife, they won't even hardly feel the cut. They'll just basically slowly go to sleep. We want to try to do this in the most humane way that we can, just because, I mean, for one, it's the right thing to do, but for two, it's just better to keep these animals as minimally stressed as possible, and I think that helps with the quality of the meat. Once the chicken is completely bled out, the next step is to scald him. Now, I have seen and read a lot of different figures on how hot the water should be to do this, anywhere from 135 to 150. For me, I've always had better luck sort of on the higher end of that spectrum, maybe like 145-ish. You definitely don't want to go too far over 150. I have done that, and what happens is it just sort of like blisters the skin. So, you know, it's really not the end of the world. It's not like you can't eat the meat, but what'll happen is you'll have to just skin the bird out. You won't be able to leave the skin on. All right, I've got my water. Looks like just a hair under 150, so that should be just about perfect. And the way that we do this is just, or what I do anyway, is stick the chicken in there and just kind of agitate the water around a little bit. This will help the hot water get down to the base of the feathers where it needs to go. And after maybe 30 to 45 seconds of doing this, we'll pull him out and check the feathers to see if he's ready yet. Okay, so in order to check and see if he's ready, you want to go for a tail feather or like the tip of his wings. Those tend to be the hardest feathers to pull out. So when we give him a little tug, see, that one's still in there pretty good, and that one is too. So he needs to go in here a little bit longer. They make special hooks that you can use to dip the chickens, and that way you don't stand a chance of burning your hand. I've never used one though. I've always just done it by hand, and so far I guess I've been lucky, or I've been careful enough where it hasn't been an issue. But that is something to consider if you're maybe a little more on the clumsy side. Alright, so check him again. Alright, see how that tail feather, that pulled out pretty easily. I always like to test a couple though, because sometimes you can just get one and that doesn't really tell you the whole story. So I think he's ready. We might have a few stragglers hang on there, but let's throw him in the plucker and see what happens. I have a homemade plucker. They do make these that you can buy. Mine's not probably as strong as a store-bought one, so what I have to do is turn it on first and then drop the bird in. All right, looks pretty good. And just like that, he's ready to go. Now, it's not real uncommon to have a few little straggler feathers hanging on here. That plucker will get most of them, but I like to try to just run through here and get them all off so that Mrs. FTR doesn't have to worry about it when she is cooking this.
With the feathers removed, the next step is to remove the feet. The easiest way that I've found to do this is to put a little bit of pressure on his knee joint, bending the leg back, and it'll expose where those two bones come together. You want the blade of your knife to go right in between the bones so you don't dull it any more than is necessary, and the leg should come right off. With the feet gone, the next step is to remove the head. I do this by cutting the base of the neck right above the breast. To gut the bird, I'll first pinch the skin right below the breastbone and pull it away and make a small slit. Once I get through the skin, I'll poke my finger in there and kind of use my hands to make that hole a little bit bigger. The main thing here is that you don't want to accidentally cut the intestines, which are right below this skin. So once you have that hole, you can sort of pull that skin up out of the way and start making your cuts that will go down around the vent. I restrict the bird's feed about 12 hours prior to harvest so that their intestines are empty in case I accidentally do nick one. And if you do and you get some manure on your meat, it's not the end of the world. It just means that you got to spend a lot more time washing the bird out with water to make sure that you get all that manure out of there. Once I have everything cut down around the vent, I can reach inside the bird and pull out anything that's not bolted down. Here you can see the way the intestines are still attached to the vent, and the vent was only hanging on by a couple threads there. So now you can kind of see why I go to all that effort to cut down and around, so I keep everything intact and I know that everything is going to stay clean. After you get that initial handful of guts out of there, probably all you're going to have left is the respiratory system. Now the lungs are probably one of the hardest things to get out of the bird, and the best way that I found to do it is to just take my pointer finger and sort of sweep it along the inside of the rib cage, working its way underneath the lung. Once you get a hold of them, they actually come out pretty easily, and you can always just look back in there and make sure that you got the lung or you got the whole lung and you don't have any pieces remaining inside. After the lungs are out, I always reach up and make sure that I got the windpipe, and then that should pretty much do it. And finally, a good blast from the hose will help to remove any small pieces that might be left in there that I couldn't get with my fingers. When I'm cleaning chickens, my philosophy is things really can't be too clean. So as long as I've got the hose out, washing out the inside of the chicken, it's a good time to wash off my table and my knives and anything else around me that might be getting dirty, including the outside of the chicken as well. And there you have it, all cleaned up and ready to go in the ice bath for about 24 hours, after which he will be packaged and then frozen. Don't miss part 2 of this series where I'll show you guys how to package these birds and get them ready for the freezer. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys, and I hope I'll see you again on Farmer Tyler Ranch.